Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Pay Attention, where we're paying attention to the hidden influences in our body and mind from moment to moment so that we can step back from all those habits and patterns and thoughts, and question them and evaluate them and toss them out if they're not serving us and make room for new to explore, to create new and to explore, our true nature between those thoughts, emotions, and feelings. And I was going back through the original episodes, and I don't even think I ever explained why the podcast is called Pay Attention. So that's why. And today was originally supposed to be a travel day for me back from chilly Minnesota after attending a conference in Lincolnshire, north of Chicago. My son wanted to go up to Duluth with his wife and I and stay at an Airbnb and walk along Lake Superior and pick up agates, which I thought was so sweet. And then I realized it was going to be a high of 20 degrees there. And though I lived in Minnesota for years and South Dakota, I thought, forget it. I'm not coming. Sorry, son. I'm going to come in the spring. And my friend I was going to visit, she goes, I just told everyone you're a huge wimp. And I said, I don't care what you tell them. It's 75 degrees here in California. So see you in the spring. But I did attend a conference in Lincolnshire, as I said. I was blessed to speak at the APCA Conference, the Association for the Promotion of Campus Activities, in Lincolnshire, just the week before. It's the week before Thanksgiving. And the first night, I was watching the main stage, and this young man comes up on the stage, and, he starts talking a lot about the same things that I talk about. And he's way younger than me. And, in many ways, we're completely different. I mean, sex-wise, ethnicity-wise, where we live, how we've grown up. But and I'm not gonna like kid you here. At first, I'm watching my mind, I'm paying attention, and my ego's coming up. I'm like, what the heck? This took me 20 years to figure out, and I'm like way old, and what am I doing here? And blah, blah, blah. But moreover, I was just amazed, right, to listen to him and just be so joyful that he gets it, and he speaks the language of an open heart. And I think probably it took me so much longer because I think the longer you're in your head, you're living in your head and you're growing those habits and patterns, the more it takes to get unstuck. So I'm just going to use that for a reason. But anyway, I am honored today to have this young man as a guest on my podcast, Wes Woodson. And welcome, Wes. Thank you so much for challenging my ego at the conference. And thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, Holly, I'm so grateful that we actually crossed paths. I never knew that you thought that when you saw me on stage. So hearing that for the first time, I'm like, oh
That's
crap,
my
like, whoa.
vulnerability, right? You have to be willing to be vulnerable.
Right, and I love that. I appreciate that. That does inspire me. So that is my promise on this podcast, is to lead with an open heart.
Excellent.
But I'm so grateful to be here. I'm grateful that we crossed paths. I think when I saw you on stage, I was just in awe. I was in awe because it's always a pleasure, and I'm not just saying this, I'm on your show. I would tell this to you even if we're offline. But it's always a pleasure seeing people who think like me and who have a similar thought pattern, and who also have open hearts, who lead with open hearts. And I love that you said that, because I've always been trying to find a way to figure out how to conceptualize or communicate my gifts. And I think leading with an open heart is the perfect way of saying it. So I appreciate you.
There you go. I love this. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are, how you got to where you're at, and then we're going to do a little kind of comparison, which I think will be fun.
I love that. 100%. So I was born and raised in a small town called Sharon, Massachusetts. So it's about 45 minutes or 30 minutes south of the city of Boston, Mass. And I grew up there. And the reason why I love sharing my story there is because that's where I learned self-hate. That's where I learned lack of self-confidence. That's where I learned that, oh my gosh, I don't like myself. And before I got on stages now talking about self-compassion and treating yourself with kindness and showing up for yourself and pouring into your glass before you pour into other people's glasses, I could barely pour into mine. I didn't even like my glass to begin with.
Right.
And the reason why is because I grew up in a predominantly white neighborhood, feeling too white for the black kids who live there, and then too black for the white kids who live there. So I honestly didn't even know where I fit in, right?
Mhm.
And growing up in that space, being told things that like you talk white, you're not black enough, or even if going down to my neurodivergence, because I have ADHD, I'm just learning about. We can get into that. But even being told I couldn't read at the proper level or I couldn't learn the right way, I learned to just not like myself.
Right, right. Just for those that are just listening and can't see you, so your your parents are, just give a little of your ethnicity.
Oh yeah, my bad. I thought it was gonna be a video podcast, but yeah,
It is video and it's audio too. So just for those that can't.
100%. For those who can't see me, I am a black male. I am a black male. My skin is dark and is beautiful, and my parents are also black. My mom is an immigrant from Jamaica, and my dad is his family's from down south, so South Carolina.
Love it.
And I grew up constantly being told by my parents, who had this image of success of what it should be. Wes, as a person of color, you have to work twice as hard to be considered just as good.
Uh-huh.
And that was almost like my mantra of like, I have to work twice as hard to be considered just as good. But the like beneath all of that, it was, I'm not enough.
Yes. Oh my
I'm not
gosh.
enough. And I spent a lot of my life, my early childhood, trying to prove to myself that I'm enough. And I went to the unhealthiest of places.
Mhm.
So fast forward to college. I'm a senior in college, and my entire college career, imposter syndrome is my best friend. It's like it's the narrator, it's the soundtrack to my college experience. I'm believing that I shouldn't be at this school. It's the number one school in the country for entrepreneurship. So I'm like, how did I even get in here? Like, why am I even here? Even my fourth year of being there, I'm still questioning why I should be there. But I ended up getting into a romantic relationship.
Nice.
And as most people do sometimes, I think being in a relationship, especially one that involves love bombing and all the sense of toxicity, when you're in it, you don't really know it's toxic. But for me, it was like, oh my gosh, this makes me feel enough, right? I'm being
Uh-huh.
told I'm
Yeah.
enough.
You complete me, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you complete me. You're my better half, the whole 9 yards.
Hmm.
And it turned out to be a very unhealthy, toxic, abusive relationship. So when I escaped that, I was hospitalized because I had a lot of thoughts of, if I don't have her in my life, right? If I don't have this person who is telling me I'm enough, and because it was abusive, it was very confusing for me of like, yo, like, who am I? Because all those years of I didn't like myself, and I
Right.
depend on this person who was liking me and loving me and showing me what I thought was love,
Right.
and I don't have her anymore, then who am I? And for anyone listening, that could be a very dark place to be, right? And that's where I was about 4 years ago, 5 years in 2 months. So in 2020, February 2020, I thought, if I'm not enough for anybody, why am I even here? And that's where I thought about taking my own life. And when I was hospitalized for suicidal ideation and depression and anxiety, that's, Holly, if I'm being honest, that's when I learned all of these things. That's when I finally learned how to love my glass. That's how I
Nice.
finally learned like the importance of positive self-talk. Understanding you don't have to entertain thoughts that don't serve you anymore. Understanding like how to not only like acknowledge the inner critic, but try to raise the inner fan, like, and become your biggest fan. So that's how I got to who I am today. That's the like very long-winded / short version of it. We
Yeah.
can get
No,
into it.
excellent. Excellent. Perfect. Perfect. And
Yeah.
I I love that. And I thank you for your story. And I'm again blown away because let's be more vulnerability here. I think you are like 31 years younger than I am. Like you're what, 26?
26. I'm 26. I'm 26.
Damn.
I'm 26.
Damn. Wes.
I'm
Gosh, that
26.
just blows me away. And I honestly think, and I think the whole reason, that you and I are at those college camp, this conference we were at is for college students.
Hmm.
Colleges come from all over the region to find speakers to bring back to their campuses. It's because
Hmm.
the younger you can catch people, the less they're stuck in all of those habits and patterns. So that's amazing that you could turn that around in such really a short time. And the goal of my work and the podcast is it doesn't take people 20 years and you know
Yeah.
whatever decades to figure it out. But yeah, so thank you for that. And what I'd like to do is just talk about some of the basics that I heard you talk about on stage that I talk about.
Yeah.
And sometimes people hear words like mindfulness and compassion and meditation, and it just
Yeah.
is this big, like, what even is that? So let's
Right.
start with self-compassion.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
how would you define that, and how would you, like, when people came up to me at the exhibit hall, I said, how do you give yourself self-compassion? And so what would you tell a person that says, how do I give myself compassion? I teach a class, and even some of the older people, like, we were really never taught, what does it mean to be kind to yourself and give yourself compassion?
It is wild that you say that because I had the exact thought that there are two things that I grew up fundamentally being told. One was the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated, right?
Right, yeah.
And then two, I was raised in the Southern Baptist Christian Church. So the fact is, in the Bible, it talks about, love your neighbor as you love yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But no one taught us how. No one taught
Exactly.
us. No one taught us the first part of the equation of
Exactly.
like,
We treat it,
right?
if you treat our neighbors as we treat ourselves pretty badly, right? When we're not
Yeah.
paying attention. Exactly.
Yes.
What does that even mean? Treat your neighbors as you treat yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. And we don't even know because honestly, that just taught me people pleasing. That taught
Yeah.
me because I knew I didn't like myself back then. So if I
Right.
wanted to like my neighbor, because I don't want to hate people, let me just please them. And it just did not, it just didn't create a foundation of what self compassion even means. And
Yeah.
I'll even tell you too, I'm sure you got this too. I'm not sure if you got this response because I know I did. After I got out of the showcase. So for those who are listening, the conference that Holly and I were at, we've got a chance to speak to a couple hundred students from across the country. And after you speak, after the whole session's over, you go back to the exhibit hall where they can come to your booth and they can meet you and shake your hand and
Mhm.
ask for pictures and all that stuff and try to book you to bring you to their school.
Right.
So as I'm walking out of the showcase area, a student kind of runs out and he runs out of the room. And this was, I kind of walked out just to take a breath after
Uh-huh.
I got off stage. So the student runs out in the middle of the session and he's like, "Hey, I love what you said on stage, but honestly, I have no idea how to be compassionate to myself. I have no idea
Exactly.
where to start. Like where to start, you
Right.
know?"
Right.
And
And you said your words of wisdom were
my words of wisdom were, his name was Love. Cannot make this up. The student's name was Love.
no.
Promise.
Dude, your name is Love and you don't know self-compassion.
Yeah. And I don't fault him for it. I think it's the fact that in the time we live, we throw a lot of buzzwords,
Yeah,
self
exactly.
compassion,
Exactly.
a lot of that. But
Hmm.
to answer your question, how I define self compassion is, what does your inner child need?
Uh-huh.
What does your inner child need and how can you give them a hug, right? Like when I find myself reacting to things like anger or I'm expressing my anxiety, I feel very anxious, I really feel like my inner child is crying out for help. So
Yeah.
self-compassion is the ability, obviously we all know, to treat yourself with grace and kindness, but concretely, what actionable steps can you take to hug that inner child? So my framework that I teach is, when I think about, I use myself as an example. There's Wes, the me now, who I'm speaking in front of you here today, and then there's Wesley. Wesley is my full name. So Wesley represents the 7, 8 year old version of myself who started to hate himself. And when I visualize that, when I externalize that, I ask myself, what does Wesley need, right? And maybe it's an affirmation. Maybe it's trying to carve new neural pathways in our brain. Maybe it's going for a walk and just trying to regulate my busy brain that I have right now. Maybe it's trying to speak with kindness to myself instead of trying to beat myself with criticism. So it's like using that framework, that's how I kind of help students picture self-compassion. Using visualization is so powerful.
Yeah. Well, when we're Wesley and Holly's my full name, but when we're that inner child, when we're young,
Yeah.
it's our limbic system, our emotional center. Our frontal cortex isn't developed enough yet. So if anything goes wrong, any criticism at all, if we don't have a healthy adult there to help us work through that pain, it becomes that trauma and it
Yes.
becomes our fault. Right. So that inner child is angry and frustrated and freaking out and like I'm a piece of garbage and all of that. So almost everyone, 80% of people have dealt with some type of trauma. So it's most people are walking around with a Wesley, right? Or a young Holly, younger, not much younger than you actually, whatever.
It's,
Anyway, but
yeah.
what I teach is similar, right? But at night, when you go to bed, right, you just lay in bed and you just, I love you. I'm here for you. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry if I abandon you,
Mm,
and create that new habit every night, right?
mm-hmm.
So that during the day when those things come up, you can find that kindness.
Yeah. My
Yeah.
my therapist taught me compassion poses. So have you heard of that before?
Compassion.
Poses.
Oh, yeah. No.
So there's different ones. Like, it's the either the, hand over the heart.
Yeah.
There's sometimes it's just holding your hands like this together.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's holding your face in
Face.
your hands like this
Yes.
or like
Love
like
it.
this.
Mm-hmm.
This is my favorite. This is my go-to compassion
Yeah.
pose.
Yeah. Crossed hands on your face. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. And when I close my eyes and I do that piece of that pose, or that posture,
Mm-hmm.
the cross of my hands and my hand and my face, or my face and my hands. I try to close my eyes and I imagine again. I grew up spiritual, so I imagine me just hugging Jesus.
Yeah.
Me just hugging
Mm-hmm.
him
Yeah.
and him holding me and
Mm-hmm.
him just imagining no matter whatever I'm beating myself up with, no matter what the shame is, the shame lie is telling me, I'm forgiven.
Right. Right.
That's kind of something that I do.
That's lovely. I love the they call it somatic touch,
Yes.
and just being there for yourself and that touch, and whether it's Jesus or your younger self
Yep.
or Buddha, whatever, right? Just
Yeah.
being
Whoever.
there and being present in the present moment, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I teach habits, right? We'll talk about habits in a
Yeah.
minute here, but do this often, right? Do it over and over. I talk about doing it at night when maybe you're not in the craziness of your head. So do it,
Yeah.
every night. Go to sleep with those thoughts. You'll wake up with those thoughts, and soon enough, as you're going along your day, and that kind of that inner critic comes up, you can find that compassion. So
Yeah. And I love the topic of habits because when you think about habit forming, I think
mm-hmm,
it takes about 21 to 28 days to form a habit, something
mm-hmm,
something along those lines. When you
mm-hmm.
think about a habit, you need to find a cue. Like you need to find
Yep.
something to cue the habit. So for you, it's at night where you're about to lay down before you go
Mm-hmm.
to bed.
Right.
That's a common cue to your brain to kind of
Yeah.
trigger these actions
Yeah.
because we are very good at like hating ourselves and beating
Yeah.
ourselves up and
Well, it's our habits. It's our
I love it.
habits.
It's our
When
habit.
we're young, we're not paying attention. We're creating habits with cues of, you see someone who's 21 or
Yep.
26 on stage and talking what you're talking, and you're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, I'm a piece of garbage.
Yeah.
Or I
It's
was
up.
paying attention. I mean, I didn't buy that. I caught it, but these
Yes.
cues that we don't even know we have, right?
Right. Right. And if you could trace back where that came from, the part that
Mhm.
I love so much is when I could sit with myself and find myself being hypercritical.
Yeah,
Whose voice is that?
that's
That's my
right.
passion. Like
You're
who's
questioning it. I love it, right? We can
who's
question
yes.
these things. Yes.
Well, that's what my framework is. I know we're gonna get into that, but I teach people, like I said in the beginning of my story, I grew up hating myself, right? And I know that's very aggressive, but it's the truth. It's the fact of I did not like myself to a very extreme degree. So the only word that I can describe that is hate. So I hated myself. But when you think about that, we all know the metaphor of pouring into your glass. We all
Yep.
know what that means.
Yep.
And
Go for it.
sometimes,
This is
yes, it's
your,
my
it's your
thing.
thing. Go for it.
It's my thing. So when we pour into our glass, right? Like what happens if you don't even like the glass you're trying to pour into? So
Yeah.
I think it's a two-step thing. Is like, for one, you got to learn how to love your glass and stop trying to be.
Love the damn glass.
Yeah, love the glass. Love the glass. 'Cause my glass, golly, it's unique. But
Yeah.
I used to compare my glass to Holly's glass, or compare my glass to Susie's glass, or Ben's glass and everyone else's. And not only that, I would overly pour into other people's glass because I like their glass more than mine, you know? And I teach people A, how to like their glass, and then B, how to properly pour into their glass. In fact,
Okay.
I made it a framework too, of an acronym of
Right.
pour. So instead of trying to, because we were at a conference where a lot of these students were student leaders.
Yes.
So I made the argument of student leaders, they do a great job pouring into other people. But how can you start to pour into yourself? Because you can't pour from an empty glass. So for me, it's like P, the letter P. P stands for pause. How can we pause instead of being on this imaginary figurative hamster wheel? And you don't have to be a student leader to know what that means. I think all of us in some way, shape, or form do that, whether it's running on a hamster wheel between trying to climb the imaginary corporate ladder, trying to, even
Impress
as a,
people, social media, living up to your
exactly,
parents, thing, all those things.
you're just running. So how
Mhm.
can we pause, right? And then be present, like be
Mhm.
present. But that's very hard for people. So then how do we now observe how we're feeling instead of
Mhm.
trying to internalize, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I
Very.
love too. Objectively
Mhm.
observe, not trying
Mhm.
to attach ourselves to the feeling. You don't gotta be on some like labeling it. Oh, this is a bad feeling, or this is a
Yep.
good feeling.
Step back, and just like, okay, yeah, I see it. Yeah.
Exactly. Step
Yeah.
back and see it. How can we also, when we're observing, start to question it? Is this
Understand.
true?
Mhm.
Where is the
Mhm.
evidence for this to be true? And then
Exactly.
what things what things do we need, right?
Yeah.
And then the U part, the letter U, how can we understand why we need
Understand.
what we need? You know, don't necessarily have to try to figure out why we feel the way we feel, because that
Yeah,
leads to that.
you don't
No,
have to delve into it. You have to understand
no,
where it came from,
sure.
and then the more you like try to push it away or ignore it, the just the stronger it gets, the more neural connections in your brain, right? So just like, okay, here it is, understand it, like it. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. And I think, and on a separate note to that point, we also do this thing. I'm guilty of it as well. When we feel feelings that we don't like, we think in our mind the solution is, let's create more distance.
Yeah,
Let's suppress it. Let's suppress
suppress.
it.
Yeah,
But when you add more distance, because you think if you're going to defeat it, let's add more distance. That's not true. That's
right.
not true. The
Hmm.
further you go from it, the more you suppress it, it's just going to get more power, because what you resist persists. I'm a
That's
firm
right.
believer
Yep,
of that.
100%.
So how can we understand where it
Hmm.
came from? Ask ourselves, what do we need?
Hmm.
A friend of mine has this great framework. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's called holdout states. Have you heard about this before by any
No.
chance? So
Mm.
when you feel like you're beating yourself up, or you feel like you're on the edge of, maybe you're going to engage in an unhealthy coping skill, ask yourself your holdout states. Are you hungry? Are you overwhelmed? Are you lonely? Are you dehydrated? Are you overstimulated? Are you understimulated? Or are you like tired? Right? So hold out. That's what it stands out. That's what it stands for. Hold out. So are you hungry? Are you overwhelmed? Are you lonely? Are you dehydrated? Are you overstimulated? Are you understimulated? And then are you tired? It's a helpful checklist to help figure out, hey, what do I need right now?
Yeah, it is. It is. There,
It
anyway,
is.
tell us your last letter, R. What does R stand for?
Rewrite. I actually
Rewrite.
changed it. It's rewrite,
You
because
changed it. What was it originally?
it was trying to like release and relax.
Yeah.
So release the expectations. A lot of the student leaders are living a life that are expectations not of their
Hmm.
own.
Hmm.
So they might feel like, oh, I'm expected to just carry on, keep
Right.
going,
Right.
but release those expectations. But the R I changed to rewrite
Right.
is a lot of us don't realize that we're storytellers of our own
That's
reality.
right. The architects
And
of our own creation. That's right.
exactly, you are a mindfulness architect.
That's
So we are preaching the same thing. And that's what R is. It's rewrite.
right. Nice. You know what I love, and I say this, I don't think I said it in Lincolnshire, but there's so many different things and people and modalities and teachings I've come across, and they all point back to these same things, right? So you have pour, I have per love, and I have the same problem with R: release, respond, recognize, and in even your friend who has, what was it, hideout? No,
Hold out.
hold out,
Hold out.
hold out.
Yep.
Yeah, and so the answers are all the same, right?
Yeah.
Pay attention, and I call it stepping off that thoughts, emotions, and feelings highway, not suppressing it, accepting.
Yeah.
And I just love to see, especially such young people as yourself, out there talking about this, because this is what we should be teaching students. And I noticed on your website that you have, and you have, a program for middle schoolers, or you're developing a program for middle schoolers. That's my ultimate goal, is to get into middle schools, because that's like the toughest time, right? And so have you been to a lot of middle schools, or what's your thoughts around that? Or
Well, that's the thing, and I'm pulling out something to show you in a second. But that's actually how I got my start, right? Uh, and it all comes from, in sixth grade, I was bullied. I was diagnosed with a rare skin condition called vitiligo. So, for those who can't see it on the screen, I have white spots on my skin. It's a skin condition. You might know this. Winnie Harlow has it. She's a famous model now, an actress. Michael Jackson had it before he passed away. It's not deadly. It's not terminal. It's an autoimmune disorder.
okay.
If anything.
Hmm.
So, anyways, I was diagnosed with that when I was 12. At the
Hmm.
same time, my parents were on the brink of getting divorced.
Mm.
So
Yep.
I was in sixth grade, and a lot of things were happening.
Yeah.
A lot of things were
A
happening.
lot of things.
A lot of things. But I had a man came in to my sixth grade class, and he spoke to us, and he told the story of his son named Ryan.
Hmm.
Ryan was a beacon of light for his friends,
Yep.
and he ended up dying by suicide because
Oh,
he was bullied tremendously.
there's more suicide in middle school than homicide.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
oh yes,
Yeah.
and we can delve into that too.
Yeah.
So he came to my middle school in sixth grade. I was 12 years old. Fast forward 14 years later, I'm 26 years old, and now I'm touring the country sharing my story
Yeah.
of how I help students. But I actually reached out to him because he was a big catalyst for me of getting into
Amazing.
the
Amazing. You
schools.
just
And
never know, right? Who's
you
going to
never
show
know.
up in your classroom? I love that. I love
You-
that when somehow down in your soul, right? You were searching, and that
Yeah.
man showed up. And so,
Yes.
yeah, middle school is, you know, and a lot of you listening are probably past middle school, but that's where we start getting stuck, right?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so kudos for you to for wanting to go back there and for starting there. I mean, that's
Yeah.
great. I was 34. It was 8 more years before I even hit rock bottom, dear.
Wow. Wow.
Before so I had many, many more years. So I'm just so happy for you that you're able to find that clarity at a young age. And we could keep
Yeah.
talking forever, but I don't want to keep this podcast going too long. So definitely, Wes, you're going to have to come back at some point, and I will hopefully see you at some more of these conferences. But
Yes, we will.
before we close, just tell people how they get a hold of you, and any last kind of thoughts, and then I'll.
1,000%. So you can find me on social media at Wes Woodson. So at WesWoodson. And same thing, weswoodson.com.
Nice.
They can keep up with me there. I'm actually in 2025 is going to be a huge year for
Yay.
me. I'm excited to go to. I'm launching a new tour, the You Are Loved tour.
Love it.
Traveling to high schools, middle schools, colleges across America. instilling in our youth that they are enough and they are loved just the way that they are.
Love it. And you have a
Excited
book
for
too,
that.
right? You have a book
I
you've
have a
written.
book. I know they
Yes.
can't see it, but I have a book called I Have Anxiety. So
So
what?
what? So what? So some people, I
The
mean, this is video also, so some people will see, but otherwise, if you're
Yes.
listening, look up that book.
If you're listening, go on Amazon, anywhere you get books. If you want to support me directly, you can actually purchase a signed copy from my website,
Nice.
weswoodson.com. And there should be a link there for books. And another thing that I'm very passionate about is teaching self-compassion to kids as early as kindergarten.
Yes.
So what I'm working on right
Yes.
now is a trading card game for kids, and they look like
Nice.
these. These are called it's called Happy
Happy
Heroes.
Heroes.
So what they are is they are kind of animated characters that represent kind of like compassion in different ways. There's
Nice.
a Captain Brave, there's a Grady Gratitude, there's a Kindness Kitten, there's Jada Joy. And my goal with this is to your point, Holly, like we need to be taught how to treat ourselves with kindness as
Yes.
early as possible.
Let's do it. Ah,
So that is
yes.
what Happy Heroes is. It's really trying to transform how compassion is taught in classrooms across America.
You and me both. You're preaching to the choir. So happy for you and for all the people that will hear from your open heart and for your big year next year. And thank you so much, Wes, for taking the time before your big crazy year to come on this podcast. And I hope to see you again, my friend.
It is an honor. It is an
Yes.
honor. Won't be the last time.
And thank you all so much for listening to another episode of Pay Attention. And we hope to see you also back here again. Cheers.